Thank you for joining our Global Regulatory Roundtable. A stellar panel has been assembled to discuss FDA updates, EU MDR updates, and international regulatory harmonization. Our webinar sponsor is Cretex Medical. Cretex Medical is a family of companies that provides a complete range of end-to-end manufacturing capabilities, the latest technologies, and the talent to match virtually any manufacturing requirement. Cretex contract manufacturing and engineering services provide orthopedic device companies a partner who can grow with your business. Our webinar moderator is regulatory consultant Sharon Starowitz. And Sharon, I would like to hand it over to you to introduce our speakers and start the discussion.
Thank you very much, Carolyn, for the introduction. I'm so pleased today to be here and to be joined by a panel of regulatory experts who will share a few updates from the evolving global regulatory landscape. Today, we'll focus on FDA. We'll hear about some of the exciting things happening in particular within the orthopedics group. We'll also hear from notified body and industry experts about the challenges and the opportunities for implementing European Medical Device Regulation, or MDR, for orthopedic devices. And finally, we'll learn about global harmonization efforts to provide streamlined and consistent approaches to the regulation of medical devices across the globe. We'll begin our session today with FDA, and we'll welcome Captain Raquel Pete, who is an officer in the United States Public Health Service and is the director of the Office of Health Technologies 6, which is the Office of Orthopedic Devices within FDA's Center for Devices and Radiological Health. In this capacity, Captain Pete has responsibility for regulating orthopedic devices for pre-market and post-market activities in a total product life cycle organization. Captain Pete, the floor is yours.
Good day, everyone. My name is Captain Raquel Pete, and I am the director for the Office of Health Technology 6, the Office of Orthopedic Devices, here within the Office of Product Evaluation and Quality in the Center for Devices and Radiological Health. I am very pleased to have this invitation to speak to OMTEC's membership pool, simply because I think it's important for you to have a great understanding of where the center has evolved, as well as more updates on the Office of Orthopedic Devices. Specifically, when looking at research, I noticed that OMTEC's mission is to educate, connect, and empower the people who build orthopedic products. And I think it's equally very helpful when we think about the mission for OMTEC that we also incorporate the mission of the center, as well as where we're heading as the Office of Orthopedic Devices. In May of 2019, we went through a large reorganization of the center. And within this reorganization of close to 200 individuals within our center, we formed a very large super office called the Office of Product Evaluation and Quality. Within the Office of Product Evaluation and Quality, this is the group that actually focuses heavily on total product life cycle, where we're reviewing a product from pre-market all the way to post-market. And there are different device-specific areas within the office. As you can see on the slide, there are seven different offices that are focusing on device-specific reviews, supported by the Office of Clinical Evidence and Analysis, as well as the Office of Regulatory Programs. Today, I'm going to speak specifically to you about the Office of Orthopedic Devices. So the mission of the center is really very much involved. But before going into the mission of the center, I wanted to speak specifically about the mission of the agency. So the Food and Drug Administration, we're here to promote and protect public health. And you can either say protect and promote the public health, but I wanted to make sure that we really focus on that conjunction that speaks to and. So it's a protect and promote. Within the CDRH mission, we're here to assure that patients and providers have timely and continued access to safe, effective, and high-quality medical devices and radiation-emitting products. provide consumer patients, their caregivers, and providers with understandable and accessible science-based information about the products we oversee. And we facilitate medical device information by advancing regulatory science, providing industry with predictable, consistent, transparent, and efficient regulatory pathways, and assuring consumer confidence in the devices marketed in the United States. I want to specifically have your eyes drawn to the bold area. In the very beginning, we speak about safe, effective, and high-quality medical devices, followed by accessible science-based information and advancing regulatory science, promoting industry with predictable, consistent, transparent, and efficient regulatory pathway, all while supporting the mission of the organization, which is to protect and promote the public health. Everything we do here at our center really focuses on the patients at heart of everything that we do. And so specifically, as you look at our vision statement, it starts with patient, and that was intentional. We wanted to focus on patients in the United States having access to high quality, safe, and effective medical devices of public health importance first in the world. So let's go into a little bit more regarding the Office of Orthopedic Devices. Since the inception of the reorganization in May of 2019, and we formed within the Office of Product Evaluation and Quality, and one of the offices, the Office of Orthopedic Devices, we have really grown in stature as an office. Previous to the reorganization, it was the Division of Orthopedic Devices. Post reorganizations, now the Office of Orthopedic Devices, and we've moved from about 50 individuals that were part of the division to close to 100 persons that are part of the office. And within the office, we have 3 different divisions that support the OHT6, Office of Health Technology Office. So once we formed as an organization, one of the things that I, as a director, as well as the leadership within our organization, really wanted to steer the ship to make sure everyone has an understanding of where we're going as an organization. And so the vision statement for the Office of Health Technology 6, the Office of Orthopedic Devices, is to be the world leader in the science and regulation of orthopedic medical devices. That was very intentional, to make sure that every single individual within our office has an idea of where we are moving as an organization, and really focusing heavily on the science and regulation of orthopedic medical devices. Our motto in our office is leading the way in a 3-to-1 approach. And by leading the way in a 3-to-1 approach, it's really forming of the 3 offices that merged into one: the Office of Device Evaluation, the Office of Compliance, and the Office of Surveillance and Biometrics that formed. And all those personnel came to different device-specific areas, specifically to the Office of Orthopedic Devices. And really making sure that we think about it intentionally to ensure that we're very much multidisciplinary approach in a total product lifecycle organization. So this gives a graphic of our organizational chart as it stands today. So in the very beginning, you'll see in the green, we'll start from left to right, there are 2 vacant positions for a deputy director, recently vacated by Mark Matheson, who retired after over 30 years. We are currently onboarding our clinical deputy director, and by the time we meet again, I will be able to give you more information as to that particular person who is going to fill that slot. Followed by a vacancy announcement to fill the other deputy director position vacated by Mark. Our chief medical officer is Dr. Vincent Devlin, and Dr. Vincent Devlin is our chief medical officer. He was formerly the deputy director for the Division of Orthopedic Devices. And we have now moved into the associate director for operations, which is Captain Tania Shupias. And our safety signal manager recently joined our office is Ho Jiang, who is coming from another office, but now she's now the safety signal manager. And shortly we will have within his place the associate director for professional development. You can see within the immediate office, not only are there leadership within the immediate office, but also too, we do have a full body of operations staff and regulatory staff to assist with the work. The three divisions within our office are the Division of Joint Arthroplasty Devices, the Division of Spinal Devices, and Division of Restorative Repair and Trauma Devices that are led by Drs. Zhang, Dr. Jean, and Dr. Coyne. And within there are assistant directors as well as team leads that form the 7 teams across our office. Really wanted to indicate of the about 100 personnel that are within our office. We're striving to increase workplace diversity. It is not an empty slogan within our office. It is really strategic in its nature, part of our strategic planning as an office, as well as decision making, which is to help us to improve our work-life balance and increase our productivity. In OHT6, we have built the best team by seeking diversity in a broad area of expertise, education, and work experience. I am extremely proud. We are extremely proud as a leadership that our big family not only has mechanical engineers, but also electrical engineers, tissue engineers, computer engineers, material engineers, biomedical engineers, but also we have orthopedic and veterinary medical officers, biologists, microbiologists, chemists, epidemiologists, nurses, regulatory medical laboratory technicians, and operations staff. That's a lot of disciplines that comprise our particular office, but we know that it's essential that we have a multidisciplinary approach to be able to address the work products that are coming in from an orthopedic standpoint. And equally, we know that the best way for a team to function is to have differences in how we are looking at a particular product, while being complementary and compatible, but it's not going to be successful if we're identical in our approach. Hence the reason why we really have a large eclectic group of individuals with their expertise, education, and work experience. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but let me go ahead and expound regarding this. So for the past 3 years, the first year we were a piloted office, and the last 2 years we are an official office. We had in February of each year a strategic planning meeting. And within the strategic planning meeting, we really focus on having strategic priorities as well as strategic goals that support the strategic priorities of the center. So let me just specifically speak about the 3 different strategic priorities of the center, which is employee engagement, opportunity, and success. The second is simplicity, and the third is collaborative communities. In February of 2021, we also came up with 3 different strategic priorities within the Office of Health Technology that really supports the strategic priorities of the center, that supports the mission of the center and the organization. And specifically, the first one is to guide and support staff in a total product life cycle within the Office of Health Technology 6, the Office of Orthopedic Devices. The second is aimed for a balanced and rewarding work environment and process improvement. And the third is enhanced internal-external collaboration. Very much intentional in our approach in making sure that the first strategic priority for our office is really streamlined on taking care of our public servants and really ensuring that we are providing engagement opportunities for growth and professional development as well as success. The second is really to be a bit more transparent. And by this transparency, it also lends itself to process improvement, as well as making sure that we have a proper work-life balance to address not just the workload within our office, but also the various initiatives. And the last is really that internal and external collaborations, because we know that within the orthopedic space, we have to focus on the entire ecosystem that also comprises our patients, industry, et cetera. So we are really heavily doing a lot more engagements externally, while internally communicating with other entities within our office, our super office, as well as the center and other centers, to ensure that we're providing the best scientific and regulatory advice as much as possible. So one of the things I wanted to speak to you today is not just the fact that we have reorganized and having a little bit more understanding of the Office of Orthopedic Devices, but equally to speak about balance and innovation and FDA regulatory perspective. I think this is vastly important, particularly where we are as an organization and where we are as a society, to make sure that there is a good understanding of balancing innovation and FDA regulatory perspective. But equally too, to really show that there is a lot of overlap with the mission of OMTech, where you are focused on educating, connecting, and empowering the people who build orthopedic devices. Similarly, here at the Food and Drug Administration, we are ensuring that we're collaborating with all of our ecosystem, our orthopedic ecosystem, to advance the science for our patients to have timely access to orthopedic medical devices. So when we're balancing innovation and safety across the total product life cycle, it is an evolution. It is not something that just runs on the tracks very linear, but sometimes it may be very much circular. And in this, it starts with an idea where you may have an invention and prototyping, morphing into preclinical, then clinical. A submission comes in, you go into regulatory decision, product is launched, then there's post-market monitoring and next generation devices. I wanted to just really hone you into this particular slide that focuses on the device development phase, as well as the device classification and pathway to market and post-market device evaluation. No, I am not going to speak a lot today regarding the pathway to market. I think that would be another presentation that we can have. But more so, I'm going to really focus how we look at it from a total product life cycle organization to be able to advance the science for our patients to have access to high quality, safe, and effective products. So most recently, one of the things that we have been focused on is not just our strategic priorities as well as the strategic goals to support those priorities, but really looking and thinking more about emerging science and technology advancement in orthopedic medical devices. The next series of slides are really going to talk about innovation as well as give some examples of what we've been thinking about. And specifically, I'll start off with this first one. It speaks to digital health. So when we're looking at emerging science and technology advancement in orthopedic medical devices, you should be well aware that the center has taken a very detailed approach regarding digital health. We now have the Digital Health Center for Excellence, but more specifically, when we're speaking about orthopedic medical devices, we're thinking about machine learning or artificial intelligence. We are also looking at software, whether software in a medical device or software as a medical device. Cybersecurity, making sure that we can collect the information without defining any kind of confidence in that particular information gathered, particularly as you think about cloud-based platform, really focusing on most least burdensome, but the regulatory framework that is needed to have these products come in. And I give some examples here of some of the things that we're thinking. Another example of emerging science and technology advancement in orthopedic medical devices can stem from just recently being in the pandemic. The pandemic has really given us some additional tools that we need to think about as a regulatory organization, and some of which really focuses on remote care and home use, whether it's dealing with monitoring and treatment, telemedicine applications or mobile applications, method validation. How do you validate these remote care and home use devices, long-term data collection, again, focusing on cybersecurity as well as some other things, image acquisition, shift to lay user and the data that is put forward in the hands of lay users as well as our providers, and regulatory framework from over the counter to direct to consumer, really thinking about how we're going to provide the best avenue for our marketing pathway and what level of evidence is needed as we move forward. Another aspect that we are thinking about when we're focused on emerging science and technology advancement in orthopedic medical device has to deal with precision medicine and personalized medicine, whether it has to be image analysis and genetic information or genetic disease markers, 3D printing, or digital health framework. Robotics, so robotic assisted surgery. I can tell you that we're getting a lot of submissions on this, and we're thinking about how we can provide, as well as the regulatory science surrounding these particular devices, such as automation, telesurgery, whether it's going to be virtual or augmented or mixed, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and these are coming across the entire orthopedic space with clinical indications. Another is novel implants and novel material. You can see on the right-hand side that we've been thinking about making sure that we provide as much information as possible. We're working on a guidance document to really address novel materials within the orthopedic space, and that is going through clearance, so we're hoping that comes out. But I wanted to just highlight a few things that we're thinking about, such as remotely programmed, whether it's resorbable orthopedic implants, nanotechnology, sensing, measuring, and advanced reporting technology, 3D printing, coding, brain-computer interface, miniaturization are some of the things that we're thinking about as an organization. And so I gave you some examples of emerging technologies, either they're already on the market or soon to be on the market, and how the landscape keeps changing. And so we have to be very flexible in how we are building our regulations and thinking about these things. So one of the things that we focused on is valid scientific evidence within our regulation, and valid scientific evidence is evidence from well-controlled investigation. And it's not just solely randomized controlled trials, but there are other ways that we can get the scientific evidence that is needed. And it's already built that flexibility within our regulations as it stands right here. One of the ways that we're thinking a little bit differently from clinical studies is really utilizing real-world evidence, and utilizing real-world evidence by partnering with different organizations, such as the Medical Device Innovation Consortium, working very closely with the National Evaluation System for Health Technology, as well as the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services when we're looking at real-world evidence. Also with the Coordinated Registry Network and other registries, such as those that are housed by AEOS, EHR. So we are looking at that, post-market surveillance and external evidence methods, really being able to address those clinical short forms we utilize in real-world evidence. I'm not going to go into detail regarding real-world data, but real-world data are data relating to patient health status and the delivery of healthcare routinely collected from a variety of sources. And this gives an overview of those variety of sources that are typically utilized to generate real-world evidence. If you would like to get a little bit more understanding specific from the center, how we're utilizing real-world evidence in our approvals, both from a pre-market and post-market standpoint, you can look at this recent publication where we're leveraging real-world evidence and regulatory submission of medical devices. There are about 90 examples, and within those examples, also there are orthopedic examples of how we have leveraged the utilization of real-world evidence to support a particular approval, clearance, or granting of a file. Thinking a little bit more as to innovation in clinical trials, whether it has to focus on clinical data infrastructure, building predictive models, observational registries, early feasibility study, remote data collection, decentralized trials addressing missing data. We can utilize real-world evidence as other mechanisms to be able to support the level of clinical evidence to be able to have a product regulatory decision being done for a product to be on the market. Although we are looking at clinical studies or clinical evidence, and we know that real-world evidence can be part of it, equally important. And remember, I focus at the very beginning on our patients and our vision for the organization, and making sure that we have an understanding of patient science and patient engagement, whether it is patient-reported outcomes, quality of life assessment, or patient preference information, because there may be instances where patients are willing to take more risk for the benefit that comes about, and we need to have an understanding of those benefit and risk profile as we make our regulatory decision. So still thinking about the total product life cycle, and I want to bring you back to that graph that spoke about that. Is really looking at post-market safety and signals, the post-market monitoring side, whether it is unique device identifier, rare adverse events, whether it's medical device reporting, review and analysis, any analytical tools that are utilized, as well as active surveillance, really just making sure that we look at it from a total product lifecycle organization. We're looking at from a pre-market as well as post-market, and enhancing those challenges that we may have with our current tools that are available. So balancing all of that, when we talk about innovation and medical device safety, is FDA is really endeavoring to sustain an approach that's both advances and interweaves our innovation and safety priorities. We've committed to this. This was done within our FDA medical device safety action plan that was launched in 2018. And hopefully you've seen some modem of change where we're providing much information regarding device safety, but also spurring innovation. And so inspiring innovation, medical device innovation, we have some regulatory programs. There are quite a number of them, but I'm going to highlight two because I think it's important, in particular for the orthopedic device ecosystem. And why I say that is one of the things that I really wanted to highlight is the Breakthrough Devices Program. We had a final guidance that was issued in 2018. And again, this is a voluntary program that provides for more effective treatment of diagnosis of life-threatening or irreversible debilitating disease or conditions. And they list the criteria that we look on, as well as two additional criteria. And the reason why I bring this up is typically those innovative products would benefit from this particular program because it does give a little bit more closer relationship with the FDA review team to provide advance very early in the development stage to be able to get to the part of being able to market it. It doesn't guarantee marketing, but it does guarantee that there is collaboration and discussion and being able to problem solve with different areas. Another guidance document that was issued, very similar to the Breakthrough Devices Program. And so if a product cannot get through the program using the Breakthrough Devices Program, such as more effective treatment, highlighted in blue for life-threatening diseases or conditions, then there's another voluntary program that was recently launched called, which can utilize products that has the potential to significantly improve the safety of existing treatments or diagnostic intended for use in diseases or conditions considered non-life-threatening or reasonable, reversible, with the same additional criteria as one of the additional criteria below. I think it's important for us because compared to the other device areas, we have a very low number of sponsors that come in with a request for breakthrough devices. And since this program has launched recently, the Safer Technologies Program, we have not had any company come in from an orthopedic standpoint for this voluntary program. I implore you to please go on our website and review the essence of these guidance documents. And if you have any innovative products that requires more touch points with FDA, I implore you to come in so that we can provide that direct feedback. So with everything we do, we're balancing between innovation and regulation, FDA perspective. As devices continues to evolve, which is a very good thing, we are mindful that the ways in which we assure reasonable device safety must also keep pace. And we must do so across the total product life cycle of a device, so from pre-market to post-market, as well as innovation and safety are not polar opposites, but rather two of the same coin. So in summary, I wanted to draw your eye to the vision for the Office of Orthopedic Devices. OHT6 is the world leader in the science and regulation of orthopedic medical devices. And this equally supports the center in the vision and mission. And just as a gentle reminder, CDRH is a science-based regulatory organization. And if you have study, proposal, or data, and you would like us to guide you through the regulatory process, again, those special programs, an example is a Breakthrough Devices Program, as well as a Safer Technologies Program. And we're very much committed as public servants to helping you develop the most efficient approach to meet our standards through the benefit and risk principles and least burdensome approaches to inform scientific and regulatory decision. And then last but not least, please consider contacting us regarding potential or planned medical device development through the Q submission program. That is always available, equally another voluntary program, and I wanted to just make sure I highlight that as well. To that end, I've come to the conclusion of my slides. I would like to thank you for listening to the information that I have provided. And if there are any questions, I'm available to answer those. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Captain Pete, for this very informative overview. I know there's a lot of exciting things going on now at FDA and among your staff, and they certainly present unique opportunities for industry, for patients, and for many other groups included within the orthopedic ecosystem. Thank you very much. Captain Pete, I have a few questions for you. My first question is, how does FDA effectively balance the pre-market and post-market review of orthopedic devices within the TPLC, or total product life cycle structure? I know it's been in place a few years now, as you mentioned, and I imagine sometimes that can be a very delicate balance. What has been your experience?
Mm-hmm. So I did not bring up here today at this particular meeting, but one of the things that we have evolved as the Office of Orthopedic Devices is utilizing the information that is gleaned both in pre-market and post-market to really foster research that are either sponsored by my office or co-sponsored by my office. And by co-sponsoring, I do mean that we are equally funding as well as collaborating with other organizations to address these scientific gaps. Additionally, as a total product life cycle organization, I think it's a lot better in the sense that we're reducing walls. And by reducing walls, you may have the same reviewer that is looking both on a pre-market and post-market side of a particular medical device, and that subject matter expertise is able to note something occurring in the post-market space, address it in the pre-market space, and vice versa, which is a lot more streamlined than before when we had different offices that the sponsors had to go to be able to address a particular concern. Equally, it is helpful because it's in one office and we're really focused heavily on cross-training our staff with a team management model. And by that, we are really cross-pollinating a lot of information where we're doing a lot of knowledge sharing. And by knowledge sharing, we are able to transfer the knowledge and document a lot of our practices here within our office. But equally, it is helpful based on the customer service information that I review on a monthly basis, that sponsors find it a lot easier to go to a particular team and be able to address a pre-market, a compliance, or a surveillance activity without having to go to different areas. And that team management model is not just addressed at the team level, but also management and leadership have a high level of collaboration across the space to be able to address in a total product lifecycle organization. So a lot of changes as to where it was before, but I do think based on the preliminary information that I am obtaining both from a quantitative as well as a qualitative perspective, it has really been beneficial across the entire ecosystem.
Great, thank you. I can't believe it. We're coming up on the 2-year anniversary. Time has flown quickly.
I feel it because I remember when I came on board, I had close to 50 individuals, very much binary. We had our engineers and our orthopedic service surgeons, but not necessarily the other disciplines that are needed to review our products. And you can see based on the number of expertise within our office, we have really heavily recruited really elite number of individuals to join our office to be able to advance the science.
Great. Great. Well, maybe a perfect lead into the next question is how does FDA and your staff keep abreast of all these new and evolving technologies? I know you mentioned a number of examples in your presentation today, but I know speaking myself, although many moons ago as a former reviewer, always thinking about what would be coming in the door next, and and perhaps it may be something where there might be little precedent or policy. How does the staff really keep up with all of that?
No, very good question, Sharon. One of the things we have been focused on, not only do we have experienced staff, but we have very new staff to the organization, is really focused on knowledge sharing, whether it is mentoring, really detailed mentoring. We also have a few databases that is a repository for orthopedic information. We have something called Orthopedia, which is like Wikipedia, where that information is housed regarding mechanical testing, clinical testing, indications for use that really at the fingertips of our staff. And equally within this particular database, it's both pre-market and post-market, and develop different modules based on the devices that are regulated in the team. So really try to have a one-stop shopping approach. We have utilized different technologies such as SharePoint. We have orthopedic rounds. We have training as well that's on a weekly basis. We have utilized micro-learning. So I'm not just documenting and writing, but also short videos to be able to do a process. And also too, one of the things that I think is really good is these different things that we have Orca, which is a database that it compiles all the information on a particular device. And that information, not only do we utilize it for our reviews, but also utilize it to draft guidances as well as develop standards as we move forward, and publications. I say all of this to say that we are doing a lot of knowledge sharing internally, but equally externally. My staff has really focused a lot on scientific publications, on our workshops, our external meetings, and also write-in publications of those workshops. We are doing more with guidances. We know that takes a time, but we have quite a few guidances that are going through the clearance process that we hope will be published soon to provide that granularity. And we're making incremental changes as we move along, such as when we are classifying all of the remaining unclassified medical devices and writing guidance documents to address those classifications of those. So there's a lot going on within our group. It won't be overnight. It's only been 2 years, but I am extremely pleased by all the things that we're doing. And it is a model to the other areas of OPEG as well as the center, particularly when it relates to our micro-learning. We love that. We have 4 generations within our office, so we have to think different ways to be able to train them.
Excellent, excellent. Well, the next question is one I think we all kind of have asked ourselves this over the past year, but in particular, have there been any lessons learned from the COVID-19 pandemic that have resulted in FDA finding perhaps new opportunities or novel ways of working?
Yeah, quite interesting topic area question. Why I say that is we're still in the midst of the pandemic, right? And so we're continuously learning a lot of lessons. I can tell you that as part of the leadership within the organization, we're constantly assessing the lessons learned and how we can adopt those lessons learned post-pandemic. One of which is the technology, being able to have functional technology that our staff can utilize to be able to do their work from anywhere without any interruption. Equally for industry and for our patients, having these different portals. So there's been a lot of investments into technology and how submissions are sent to the agency. So those are some of the lessons learned. We have really put a lot of investors in technology. Second is, the basic premise of a total product lifecycle organization, which focuses on an agile workforce. Although we're in orthopedics and we are helping other offices that are heavily overwhelmed with COVID-19 work products. And so that's the agility of the workforce, being able to train on a particular science as well as the regulatory process is the same regardless of what office you're in. You just need to know the science. And so we have really been focusing on that knowledge sharing and being agile. Another aspect that we've looked at is really making sure that we can streamline guidances. You can see the immediate effect guidance document comes out very quickly, goes through a lot of different layers to get clear, but it was more streamlined and collapsed. And so we're utilizing that to see how we can do our regular guidances and get them through the process a lot more streamlined as it stands right now. And then lastly, what I would say about lessons learned is just really focusing on our staff. They're the most important things here, important in the organization to be able to address all that we do. Without focusing on our staff and their well-being, we will not be able to address our public health mission. And so we have been heavily vested as a leadership on focusing on engagement, opportunity, and success, and also focusing on their well-being. to be able to advance the science.
And Captain Pete, one final question for you. What do you see as the biggest opportunities in the future of orthopedic device regulation?
That's a very thoughtful question. And I would say the biggest opportunity that we have is our external collaboration. We would be remiss to think that only FDA solely can advance the science when it relates to high quality, safe, and effective medical products. It will include our orthopedic ecosystem that comprises patients. It also comprises different organizations. It comprises our caregivers. It comprises industry. It comprises academia researchers. And we have really focused on broadening the horizon for orthopedic ecosystem. Our surgeons are also equally important. And hearing all voice, not just FDA's voice at the table, is where those are the biggest opportunities I see for orthopedic medical devices. Quite naturally, by having those collaborations very early and often will lend itself to really making sure that we are communicating and doing the information transfer and understanding the various perspective, not just getting from FDA a deficiency and not understanding those deficiencies, but for FDA to also hear from the perspective of those within our ecosystem and being able to collaborate a lot more to address any regulatory or scientific challenges.
Great. And I can also echo those collaborations are also important to industry. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to now turn our attention to Europe, specifically to the challenges and opportunities presented by the EU MDR. We have a very distinguished panel of notified body and industry experts who I would like to now introduce. I'll begin with Dr. Matthias Fink, who is a familiar face to OMTech. Dr. Fink is presently the clinical focus team manager at TÜV SÜD and is an orthopedic trauma surgeon by training and by practice. Joining Dr. Fink is Kevin Madden, who is the team training lead and technical team manager for orthopedic and dental devices and regulatory services for BSI. And we're also joined by Dr. Basel Akra, who previously worked as a notified body and is now the CEO and co-owner of Qunique GmbH, which is a consulting firm specializing in developing tailored solutions to support, maintain, and improve compliance of its customers in the medical device and in vitro diagnostics sector. So now I'd like to turn the program over to Dr. Akra to get us started.
Thank you, Sharon, for the introduction and for inviting me to be part of this panel today. I think it's a very key topic, and especially impacting orthopedic device manufacturer. The MDR is a regulation which was developed towards getting safer devices, but also supporting innovations in the future in Europe. Now, looking to the orthopedic devices that are covered by the medical device regulation, we recognize when we read the regulation that the regulation has a big impact on this industry. Why? The first point is we are seeing, based on the new classification rules, up classification of a major number of devices, moving from 2A, 2B to class 3 devices. But we have also devices that were based on sampling process in the past, which are now based on a full assessment because the regulation is expecting higher requirement on those kind of devices. We have also an increase in the clinical data requirement on generally on implantable devices. And the orthopedic device industry is impacted by that critically. I'm happy to be today with Kevin and Matthias, who are representing two notified bodies and are having currently their first experience with the medical device regulation and its implementation with regard to those specific topics on how to deal with a device which is already today on the market, which is defined by the regulation to be a legacy device. But this device is now moving to the medical device regulation and needs to get an initial certification according to the new rules. Kevin, I would direct my first question to you and would like to know from you perhaps if you can share with us some experience about your initial, let's say, learning I name it learning. I know that you are a notified body expert, but learning because the regulation is for all of us new, and you need to learn how to implement it for the first time in comparison to the old directive. What are the differences between the old system and the new system with regard to certification of orthopedic devices?
Thanks, Basil. So I can assure you that we're always learning in this role, especially now. I feel like in my whole career, I've never had to learn as much as I have to right now, because we seem to have a new MDCG guidance document every week. There's something new every week to learn. Within the orthopedic and dental team at BSI, we've been preparing for the MDR for 4 years now, but we issued our first MDR certificate from the orthopedic and dental team in April 2020. So that was a huge learning curve for the team to go through the conformity assessment and issue our first MDR certificate. I think we've issued about 10 certificates so far, MDR certificates, which is relatively small, but we have a huge number of tasks going through conformity assessment now. So we have over 150 certificates in progress that haven't been issued yet. In terms of the differences and I suppose the level of conformity assessment and the timelines, it's probably a little bit early to know how much longer it takes, for example, from an MDD to MDR. It is definitely takes longer to do a technical documentation review for MDR versus MDD. And it's very much dependent on device classification, novelty, quality of the technical documentation submitted. In terms of actually doing a technical documentation review, the same principles are in place as there was for MDD, essentially. And what we're finding is that manufacturers are generally addressing the new MDR requirements quite well. And that manufacturers are doing their best to interpret the regulation and the guidance and are learning. So it's been challenging for manufacturers to put their documentation together while guidance is not in place or is being developed or is just being released over the last year. Some definite challenges that we've seen, so all of the reviews we've done so far have been on legacy devices. And a couple of things to really point out to people is that a standalone technical documentation file is required. So it's not a gap analysis against MDR. The technical documentation that's submitted has to stand alone. And what's crucial is that technical documentation is clearly organized and makes it easy for the technical reviewer to find what they're looking for. And I would, suggest that manufacturers consider how they're actually putting together their technical documentation. So Annex 2 of the MDR clearly states the different sections, but consider the reader of the technical file. Manufacturers, your devices inside out from years of experience. The reviewer will be seeing it for the first time. They'll generally have knowledge on the technology, but they won't necessarily know your device really well. So the clearer and more organized you can make the file, the better.
Thank you, Kevin. And I think this is key what you just mentioned, because I always recommend, with my new role as well as a consultant, for manufacturers that they put themselves in the position of the reviewer, because at the end, you need to provide the message in a digestible way. And you need to keep in mind that the person on the other side need to understand your storyline to come to the same conclusion like you are doing. So I think those are very helpful recommendation. And I fully understand that the experience at this moment is not that far that you can do a direct comparison one-to-one. But one key point which you mentioned is actually the assessment duration and the detail level of the MDR assessment is different to the MDD. You need to dive into much more details, and the reporting will be much more, let's say, complex in comparison to the past, which would require then more capacities and more resources at the notified bodies to ensure that they fulfill their obligation as well. One key point with regard to the MDR, which is actually the main focus of the MDR, is more clinical evidence, sufficient clinical evidence. And orthopedic device manufacturers are impacted critically because of the fact that those devices with a huge, let's say, amount are related to implantable devices. So orthopedic implantable devices, which were in the past 2A, 2B devices, implantable, but they were based on sampling. And manufacturers were applying, in a lot of cases, the equivalency approach from a clinical point of view. And the clinical data on the subject device were limited. Now, the MDCG in Europe with the 2020-6 documents, they tried to make, let's say, a suggestion. And I remember my time at the notified body when we were drafting that document, that we tried to provide a lean process for the manufacturers that are legacy and well-established technology manufacturers. Now, Matthias, when you look to all of these submissions coming to you as a reviewer at the notified body, do you see that manufacturers are applying the MDCG accordingly? And do you feel that this document really helped manufacturers getting their devices moving from the old legislation to the regulation without additional clinical data collection to get to the point to get CE marked?
Thanks for the question, Basil. Yeah, it's a very complex question, and I would like to start with something because that's also I've seen and I've learned in the last, let's say, 12 months since we have seen this MDCG 20-6 being published last year, to really differentiate between a legacy device and a well-established technology. I mean, the MDR defines a legacy device in Article 2, basically every device already on the market under the MDD or AMDD, regardless if it's 5 months, 5 years, 50 years. And well-established technology, which is not defined in the MDR, which is defined in the MEDF2, in the MDCG 2020-6, has a little bit of a much more stringent definition. So not every legacy device can be considered a well-established technology. And we see sometimes a little bit confusion that manufacturers consider their legacy device automatically well-established technology and think they can go this suggested pathway with the MDCG 2020-6. As you said, a lot of especially orthopedic manufacturers are highly impacted by the MDR, by the higher scrutiny. We saw a lot of devices being approved on equivalence in the past. For whatever reason, not sufficient data was collected in the post-market setting, which led to a couple of safety issues and recalls over the last 10 years in Europe. And I think this is one of the reasons why the legislator made the equivalence demonstration so much more stringent now than we had it in the past. But of course, we have, I think, over 500,000 medical devices in Europe. Yes, of course, some of them might not be state of the art any longer, and manufacturers might now go through their portfolios. We definitely will see a smaller number of devices under the MDR because some devices might be obsoleted. There are a couple of mergers within manufacturers, so there might be redundancies in their portfolios. And as I said, certain devices probably might not be fully up to the state of the art any longer, even if they're still used in certain quantities. But of course, no one wants to see a big risk that a lot of devices, especially devices which are considered well established because they are in use for a very long time. And let's say some devices in the orthopedic field are on the market since, I don't know, 40, 50 years, nearly unchanged in the design. Yes, especially for orthopedic trauma implants, a lot of the indications have changed and we saw a lot of new devices, but a lot of those devices still have their place in the day-to-day surgical toolbox of the orthopedic trauma surgeon. So no one wants to see any kind of lack of devices and probably point any risk to patients that some operations might be postponed because of the shortage of those devices. So in my opinion, the MDCG 2020-6 is a very helpful document. I think it should have been provided or published a little bit earlier because we already were working on MDR submission 5 before this MDCG was published, and manufacturers really, we had discussions with them and there was a lot of uncertainty. What can we do with those data gaps? We see this now more and more, it's going to get used. We have to be a little bit careful that it's really meant, I mean, the intention of this guidance document is to help manufacturers of those legacy devices, which can be considered well established, meaning they have a certain history. The generic device group doesn't bear any real big procedural risks. To keep those devices on the market under the make those transition under the MDR. But of course, then manufacturers have to ensure that, and this is the task of notified body, to ensure that they have a robust PMCF activity in place to then, if they got their initial MDR certificate for one of the legacy devices, then they still collect clinical data to properly close those data gaps they're having, and not what we do not want to see that they use this MDCG 2020-6 guidance and saying, okay, we have a legacy device and we're going to see this in the next 5-10 years, always the same argumentation by manufacturers. Well, we don't need clinical data, we don't need PMCF because we have a legacy device and they reference the 2020-6.
Thank you, Matthias, for this summary. And I think this is very good recommendation for manufacturer from both of you, Kevin and Matthias. I think the most important part, which I take as a summary from what you said, is you need to apply guidance documents in a reasonable way. You need to consider not just one specific requirement for a moment of time. You need to look to the long-term strategy. And clinical data doesn't mean that I need to do always a study, which is a prospective study. There are multiple methodologies to fulfill the obligations. And you need to understand your device, understand the intended purpose, and based on that, develop a strategy for the initial certification, but also a strategy for continuous market approval and continuous compliance as an applicable requirement. Thank you, both of you, for joining me to this session. It was really very interesting to understand your view from an orthopedic point of view, and I'm looking forward for our future cooperation and discussion on getting devices certified in Europe. Thanks a lot.
Great. Thank you all for what has been a very interesting discussion. I think this really drives home the significant impact that the MDR has on orthopedic devices, orthopedic device manufacturers, and certainly will continue to have for some time. Our last, but certainly not least segment today is focused on the broader global regulatory landscape. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Kim Troutman, although I don't think Kim really needs a lot of introduction. As many of you know, Kim has many years of FDA and industry experience in medical device quality systems and international regulatory affairs. And Kim was the chief architect behind the conception and the development of the International Medical Device Single Audit Program, otherwise known as MDSAP. Kim also wrote and harmonized the current US FDA quality system regulation and was on the international authoring group of ISO 13485 since its inception. So today, Kim will be speaking about MDSAP and other international regulatory harmonization efforts. And so Kim, I'll turn the podium over to you.
Thanks, Sharon. So today we're going to talk just a teeny bit about MDSAP, but really the effect of MDSAP and some of the other international harmonization efforts going on in IMDRF, which is the International Medical Device Regulators Forum. So let's take a look at a couple things. So number one, MDSAP, or the Medical Device Single Audit Program, as I like to call it, was my non-biological child. Literally conceived back in 1996 when I was doing training for what was then the new quality system regulation. But it took, like everything internationally, it takes time for things to percolate. And by 2011, 2012, we started getting the concept of a single audit program off the ground. We utilized the FDA, the International Medical Device Regulators Forum, to provide some foundational documents. And then the consortium for MDSAP, being Australia, Brazil, Canada, Japan, and the United States, with observers from WHO, the European Union, and the UK, have really now been very, very successful. And many of you, I'm sure, have had an MDSAP audit. So let's see how the international regulatory community is building off the success of MDSAP. And one of the first ones that I want to talk to you about, and again, even when I was still at FDA back in 2015 and 2016, when the IMDRF Good Regulatory Review Practice was first formed, the intent was to build upon and off the success of what we hoped MDSAP would bring about. Now, this particular group, working group within IMDRF, is currently being chaired by Melissa Torres from US FDA, and it is a regulatory body, a regulatory authority membership only. But I want to take a look at this particular group. And again, you might not be paying attention to this because this is something that the regulators are doing. It's really kind of harmonizing practices around global regulators and what they think is good practice in these topics. But it is building the foundation, as I'll show you, for a third party, or at least a harmonized regulatory system. Now, it might not happen overnight, but let's take a look at several of the published documents that they have over the past 3.5, 4 years. They have developed a competency and training requirements document. They have built off of the old Global Harmonization Task Force Essential Principles document and have updated that. They have a document on principles for labeling, as well as regulatory requirements for the regulatory authorities if there is going to be a conformity assessment for third-party systems. So if we kind of take a look at the difference between MDSAP and the third party, you're going to see several common themes. So number one, competency and training. You can tell from the MDSAP working group that there was a competency and training document, and now you also see a very, very similar document on the good regulatory review practice. Again, another common theme is the requirements for recognition. So really kind of having a forethought for the future of potentially either expanding, as we'll talk about in a minute, third parties, or at least harmonizing some third-party review aspects when it comes to conformity assessment. And so again, there's a lot of similar themes between the MDSAP and the Good Reviewer document that has to do with requirements for third-party recognition. So this concept of third parties and regulatory authorities both being able to perform certain functions, again, was originally developed under the Medical Device Single Audit Program, where the system was developed for regulators or third parties to be able to perform the functions in a similar fashion. If we look at the Good Reviewer practice documents, again, it's focusing on requirements for organizations that will conduct marketing reviews, medical devices, IVDs, and the individuals performing those regulatory reviews. Whether we're talking about the new organized FDA offices in the Center for Devices, or we're talking about the notified bodies in Europe, or we're talking about Health Canada, all these different areas can do a combination. We also have the Japanese PMDA that already has a mix depending on device class as to whether PMDA does certain pre-market reviews or third-party reviews. So this is all set up to try to harmonize for this potential use of building fundamental building blocks or foundations by which you can develop some commonality in competency requirements, commonality in certain basic procedures, and commonalities in how governments and competent authorities might recognize third parties or hold their own internal staff to some of the same requirements. So some of the foreseen future utilization, and again, you should keep your eye on some of this when you start seeing some of the next round of US FDA user negotiations. But for several years now, there has been a sentiment in the Center for Devices to want to expand the 510K third-party review program. And on the premise that the 510K review program can be expanded utilizing the foundations of these Good Reviewer practice documents from IMDRF. There's also the thought that maybe some of these documents could be utilized to help as the designation process kind of goes through and comes to a steady state, that some of these documents can also be used with regard to notified body designation process to ensure consistency, not only within Europe, but across multiple different jurisdictions, third parties that might be reviewing pre-market applications. Now, that's very, very regulatory focused. What I want to do now is I also want to focus on some harmonization efforts that manufacturers need to pay attention to now and should be incorporating. If we look, for example, at the IMDRF Adverse Event Reporting Terminology Group, this is something that if you are not familiar with, it's really important that you get familiar with fast. The chair of that working group is from Japan. And again, while it's a regulatory membership only, it is very important. It was a very concerted effort within IMDRF to have for the medical device industry sector something that is similar to what the pharmaceutical sector has in MedDRA. And that is these IMDRF adverse event terminology and codes. There are a series of very, very important base documents that talk about the terminologies that will be used in adverse events. But some of the most important ones for manufacturers to look at are actually some of these annexes, especially Annex E and Annex F, okay? Because as I'll talk to you in a moment, while it is required that these codes and terms be used in adverse event reporting, there are also some additional, not currently required, but some really, really good techniques that you can use these codes in your risk management system to really help tie some of that post-market and pre-market information together with risk management. And again, as many of us have been talking about over the past several years, the new requirements within the EU with MDR and IVDR and some of that uptick in requirements for risk management and that continuity of life cycle approach. So let's talk about these codes. Number one, for Europe, it was mandatory in January of 2020, and they put out this information. You can go look, but the manufacturer incident report is basically required, going forward. And as you can see from this Q&A document, they are requiring that the IMDRF adverse event codes and terms be utilized. All right, and they are talking about it also in terms of trending data. So again, a lot of that post-market surveillance requirements is very, very much going to be hinging on certain, adverse event codes. So again, if we look at the IMDRF website, we also see that purpose of, the medical device codes and, kind of being equivalent to what the pharmaceutical has in MedDRA. But it's very important that all of you as manufacturers are aware of this and aware of the uptake within Europe for this adverse event coding. Now, we also need to look at the fact that FDA has had its own set of adverse event codes for 30 some years, and they have also committed and already transitioned to these IMDRF codes. We can see here on the slide that they did it in 2 steps. In the first step, they picked different layers. So there's typically 5 layers of codes in the US MDR coding system. And the first step, they picked some of the foundational codes and have already transferred the FDA codes to the IMDRF codes back in July of 2018. Now, the final step of that second stage actually happened in September of 2020. So here we are, last fall, where FDA now has also completely transitioned its old MDR codes to what is now the IMDRF codes. So we've got 2 major regulators that are absolutely making these IMDRF adverse event codes mandatory. So this is one thing that I want to just stop 1 second. But again, those IMDRF adverse event codes can be very advantageous, not only from a post-market perspective, but very, very helpful in a risk management perspective as well. Now, what I want to do is focus on a different subgroup. And now this is one of the original founding subgroups within IMDRF, and that's the regulatory or the regulated product submission or RPS. And this was built upon the Global Harmonization Task Force work that they had with, just kind of like chapters and sub-chapters as to how there might possibly be a one-size-fits-all submission where you would have a framework that would have submissions for pre-market entry contain certain chapters and sub-chapters, and then country-specific requirements or overlays would be underneath that. If we take a look at that RPS, as it's referred to, that RPS system, and again, this is all publicly available on the IMDRF, where they have the base RPS outline. And again, I wouldn't focus necessarily on the electronic HL7 submission part of RPS, but focus on the chapters and sub-chapters. Because what I want to call your attention to is that FDA is already moving in that direction, even for the 510K process, which is very, very different, as we all know, from a global perspective market entry pathway. But if you take a look at the voluntary eStar pilot program for e-submission, which just this week here, it was announced by FDA that this was going to be the primary e-submission pathway for 510Ks. The FDA has already, to the best of its ability, taken that RPS concept and overlaid it in the 510K process as best as possible, understanding that, again, the 510K process or the Me Too process is a bit different market entry pathway than most other global regulators have. But FDA has already taken such steps. The person at FDA who is on the RPS, who is very instrumental in working there, is also very instrumental in working on some of these e-submission programs within CDRH. So if you're not familiar with that eStar pilot, which is now becoming no longer a pilot, but the formal mechanism, you're going to be able to see, some very, very basic metadata. And wherever possible, that metadata and collection was also looked at with regard to the IMDRF RPS. So what's next? The exciting next steps is that FDA is looking at the RPS and looking at how the eStar system might also be able to be used for post or pre-market applications or PMAs, and further incorporating that IMDRF table of content and underneath the RPS system. So these are some, work within IMDRF that while they are set up primarily as regulators only, it is exceptionally helpful if you continue to keep an eye on these efforts and read the tea leaves as to where some of these activities are going. And that will really, really help you kind of get a flavor for how some of the IMDRF initiatives are being incorporated in as we move forward. And it's not just in the US and it's not just in Europe. Canada, Japan, and many other regulators, Australia, are really looking to take some of this IMDRF and incorporate it into their regulatory systems. And we as manufacturers and experts in the industry need to keep our eyes on those works. Even though industry might not be formal members of IMDRF, we need to make sure we stay abreast of those activities, because there are long-term plans for having the regulatory agencies move forward with respect to converging activities and converging practices. So hopefully we just gave you a quick overview today of some of those activities. Sharon?
Thank you very much, Kim. You provided a great overview of things happening in the international regulatory arena. And I think this presents, it presents a picture of hope. I think that there have been some meaningful changes that have occurred through these international harmonization efforts, but also looking forward, I think it also presents some exciting possibilities for the future. And it's clear that there is a desire for global regulators to work together, having that common goal of creating streamlined and efficient processes for the regulation of medical devices that are distributed throughout the world. So thank you. I'd like to now invite all of our speakers to address a couple of questions. And these have been questions that have been on my mind and maybe are on the audience's mind as well. And so with that, I am going to give the first question to you, Kevin. So I'm curious to know, from a notified body perspective, what are some of the most common deficiencies that you're seeing as manufacturers are preparing for and executing against the new EU MDR? And are you seeing any particular trends and maybe a little quick follow on, anything that you see that might be specific to orthopedic devices or orthopedic device manufacturers.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Sharon. I suppose I mentioned this a little bit earlier. I'll answer the question with two parts, really. The first is, one of the biggest general deficiencies we see is on organization of the technical documentation. So thankfully, the MDR now has an annex which sets out the sections and the requirements for each section for the technical documentation. But even within that, it's the file that is submitted to the notified body is sometimes difficult to navigate. And really, I suppose for manufacturers, you need to know your audience. As technical reviewers, we're tasked with trying to understand the device at the point of the review, which is over hours or days, whereas the manufacturer has lived and breathed their device for many months or even years. And the documentation may make sense to them because of their understanding and their ability to, say, walk over to the next cubicle and ask a subject matter expert a question. However, we don't have that luxury, even though we know that we have knowledge on the device in general. So if manufacturers can ask themselves, is this 10,000 page document going to make the reviewer's life easier or more difficult? And maybe even an internal audit by an independent person within the company who's not been involved in the review, that could benefit the quality of the technical documentation that's submitted. So that's a huge thing. And the more organized it is, the better, the less likely you are to get multiple rounds of questions. Within the questions themselves that are raised, or the deficiencies that are raised, the biggest one, unsurprisingly, is clinical evaluation. It's definitely the most number of questions raised on clinical and post-market surveillance and post-market clinical follow-up plans. Another big area is around design specifications and design verification validation. So, for legacy devices where the testing might have been performed many years ago, you still need to tell the story. So in the technical documentation, anything you can do to provide context around the device testing that has been performed is really appreciated, So make it really clear, include summaries of the testing that was performed, and make it really clear to the reviewer what design verification and validation testing supports that device. Biological evaluation, there are some new requirements in the MDR, quite a lot of questions on that. Manufacturing and process validations, again, making it really clear what validations have been performed that's relevant to the device. Labels and IFUs questions, risk management. So I suppose just to sum up in terms of advice, make the documentation really easy for the reviewer to navigate. Read the relevant portions of the MDR and associated MDCG guidance documents and address these to the best of your ability. Make it clear what clinical data is being used to support each design variant and which indication. If you're claiming equivalence, provide detailed and clear supporting evidence demonstrating clinical, technical, and biological equivalence. And check alignment between the documentation, so the SSCP, IFU, the CER, etc.
Sharon, if I could just jump in real quick to some of the comments that Kevin made, is myself and some of our colleagues have taken some of those MDCG guidances on technical documentation and actually have mapped it to the RPS table of content, and have been very, very successful in having that be reviewed by the notified bodies, because a lot of regulators had already given thought to it. The Europeans had done the pilot against the directives. I know it's kind of far down in the list of things that the Commission has to do right now with everything coming forward, but they still have a commitment to IMDRF to map that table of content to the new regulations. So I'm here to kind of give you some forethought of possibly, to what Kevin says as one of the major deficiencies is if you're having trouble organizing that documentation, a very good mapping exercise between existing guidance and the IMDRF table of contents may really help you with that organization for better success. And myself and other, some clients have been very, very successful, especially in the IVDR area. So just a thought to tie the two topics together.
Excellent. Thank you. Very sage advice, Kevin and Kim. Really appreciate that. Transitioning a bit to the clinical side, Dr. Fink, my question for you is, how do you think devices will be assessed over time to be eligible for categorization as well-established technology, or WET? Certainly as more clinical history and data is amassed over time. What are your thoughts about that?
That's a very interesting question. I mean, first of all, I mentioned that in our panel earlier, manufacturing needs to differentiate between legacy device and well-established technology. The well-established technology concept really is helpful right now in the transition phase from MDD to MDR for those devices which already have a certain market history to help manufacturers keep those devices on the market under the MDR. Then I also said this earlier, it's very important to have a PMCF activity in place to really collect data on their own device. So ideally, if the manufacturer, once he got this MDR certification, he's able to collect in a whatever type of PMCF activity. There are a lot of possibilities depending on the device of the risk class, what kind of data sources are out there. They're able to collect this kind of PMCF data, and then ideally in the future, they will have at some point sufficient data on their own device that they would even not need to justify, okay, well, we have a well-established device and we probably don't have sufficient data at this point for our own device. Also, of course, I mean, just one topic here, common specification. At this point, we're still waiting for the first common specification on Annex 16 devices. I know that the European Commission already is trying to get feedback from notified bodies. Okay, what should be the next common specifications we should work on and probably should be published. If you look at the MDR, if you look at those list of devices, and just mentioning Article 18.3, exempted from an implant card, there's a lot of devices listed on there that are exempted from certain requirements of the MDR. A lot of them are like plate screws, pins are in the orthopedic field. At some point, we might see some common specifications that are, let's say, covering plates or covering screws in the orthopedic field. So this also then might help manufacturer probably to have a limited or lower number of clinical data, especially for the initial submission, if there might be common specifications out there for that type of devices. And of course, in general, we've seen in the last, let's say, 20 years, a huge increase in the not only quantity, but also in the quality of published clinical data, independently published clinical data, a lot of medical journals. The quality really is increasing. We see more and more registries coming up, a lot of discussions now in certain European countries to establish implant dependable device registries. So we're hopefully going to see more real world data sources in the future. But again, to come really to the question here, hopefully at a certain point manufacturers have sufficient data for their own device. They'll even not be able to rely on well-established technology any longer.
Thank you. Thanks, Dr. Fink. And Kim, my last question goes to you. Just having, as you mentioned, been involved through many years in working on the international harmonization side and working with a number of global regulators, I'm curious to know if you've seen any changes or what might have stood out in your mind as noteworthy through the years and how the global regulators might be approaching harmonization of regulatory requirements.
Sure. So clearly the major emphasis and shift going from Global Harmonization Task Force to the IMDRF, the International Medical Device Regulators Forum, was to expand it beyond just the foundation of the 5 original GHTF members. So it's really important to make sure that people recognize, I mean, we've got the 10 ASEAN countries that are out there right now finalizing their medical device directives. We've got other consortiums such as the Pan-African Harmonization Working Party still being chaired by Tanzania, with regulations that have been proposed in South Africa and other African countries. We have the Euro-Asian working group in Eastern Europe, which includes a consortium of 5 Eastern European regulators. And all these groups now are starting to be engaged better within IMDRF, such that, again, everything internationally is kind of 2 baby steps forward, maybe 1 baby step back. But it really is important to understand that the regulators are trying to take the attitude of convergence on things that they have control over. So not necessarily harmonizing all the regulations. Okay, so the US regulations and the EU regulations, to harmonize those type of legislations is not practical. So what can the regulators really do from a day in and day out practical standpoint? We talked about the third-party review program. Clearly, we know the third-party review is well established with the notified bodies in Europe. There are other regulators in Japan that have a mix. So how can FDA, for example, play in that in a more consistent global attitude? So I think, at least from a US perspective, it's always been, how can we contribute as a country to move forward? All the global regulators are really looking to try to leverage resources and to make it easier both for the industry and more consistent for the industry, as well as the regulators themselves, all with the goal of public health. And that's the most important thing. As we kind of hopefully we'll be wrapping up this pandemic sometime soon, if we always just remember that all these international activities with the central goal of being patient and public health, and we're all on the same side in that regard.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, I can't think of a better way to end this session. And thank you all, to all of our great speakers today who've graciously shared not only updates, but also offered their unique perspectives on different facets of the global regulatory environment. A special thank you to OrthoWorld and Cretex Medical for sponsoring this educational session, and really to you, our audience, for your virtual participation today. Goodbye for now, and I wish everybody a good day. Thank you.
Thank you to Sharon and our panelists for the great conversation. I want to echo Sharon's comments and say thank you to our panel for joining us today and providing great insight based on their experiences with the various global regulations. And I also want to thank you, those of you who are watching, and hope that you gained new knowledge as you continue to implement your regulatory strategy. You can learn more about our sponsor, Cretex Medical, at cretexmedical.com, and you can access more regulatory-focused education, including more expertise from these panelists, at omtechexpo.com.